Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Last part of my conversation with Darin Ostrom, sports card professor. We were on for a long time. It takes a while to edit it because we'll go off on tangents, but that's what guys that care deeply about the hobby do and want to dig deeper. Darin's a little bit of a professor, a little bit of a detective, and I appreciated his research. Keep up the good work, Darin.
I've thought a lot about how you design a card set for kids, which you talk about with a lot of your guests. I keep coming back to subsets because a good card set is a storybook and it tells a story about the sport. When I was starting out, even though I was a football fan of 6 years at that time, I was learning a lot about the game from Crunch Crew, learning about defensive linemen, defensive backs, and getting more of that storytelling in there to help kids to focus in on aspects of the game and give access to some of the players they don't typically hear about. Make sure there's at least one set that has that pretty well taken care of.
The set that took care of it was the Fleer in action sets from the late 70s and 80s. No licensing from the Players Association. And if they don't sell well, those are readily available in the later years. And they got team stickers on the back. The hobby has always been marketed not as a storyline or a learning experience as much as a superstar connection. You have to marry that together. What's the big story in the American League this year? Cal Raleigh, the big dumper catcher that's got 62 home runs or whatever he's got. That's just amazing, okay? Because there's a story and the performance. He's gone from a defensive specialist to the greatest catcher slugger of all time for a season. And so that's a story. But he was Gold Glove best fielding catcher the year before. But yet he wasn't in Topps flagship until update, I think.
Yeah, that's true. But for subsets, kids tend to spend a lot more time looking at their cards, whereas adults tend to spend more time looking at the checklist and figuring out the next step. When we think of ourselves as kids, we remember sitting on the floor on our bed, looking through the cards, reading the card backs, really poring over the cards. So making sure there are card sets that are designed to be explored, I think is a big part of it.
So when my buddies at Panini are doing Chronicles, you would say for kids, that's going the wrong direction. That's more different base set kinds of designs of the most popular players with no real story there. You're just getting a whole bunch of the star players. You're talking about telling a story through the completion of the insert set. Not just, hey, that's an interesting looking design. It's, I want to get all those. Not just because they're nice looking, because they have some cohesion. But it's not what the card companies are doing.
How many cards designed today even have full stats list on the back of the cards?
People aren't asking for it. I don't think they care about it.
But that's because the adults are asking for it. I'd like to see more engagement, a more youthful mind of imagination and exploration.
But what does that mean? You have to be continuously innovating. Okay, Darin's got a great idea, and in 2026, we're going to deploy that idea. By 2027, it could either be copied to death or obsolete. You've got to keep coming up with more innovations. I agree. The subsets or insert sets, things that weave a story. You had the Pro Line profiles. Yeah, those are really interesting. And you'd want to get all 9 if it's your favorite player or somebody from your team.
Fleer at the same time was doing their career highlights. And they had a different name for each sport, where they had subsets, like with Upper Deck's Heroes, that gave you that same little storybook, just focusing on one player. And having those kinds of little dedicated sets, not necessarily for the biggest names, but names to bring kids in.
But looking back, those one per pack kinds of things get no respect. So you've got to walk that line of challenging, not too tough, but not too easy. One per pack is too easy. The one per box is probably too hard for a kid to think I'm going to buy a bunch of boxes so I can complete this insert set.
Yeah, I agree with that. The last video I did was for 1995 Fleer football. And looking at the inserts, I'd never really looked at the inserts in that release because they were one per pack, almost all of them. And as I looked at them, I realized they were a lot better than the 94. But you're right. I never took the time to pay attention to them because they're like popcorn. You're just trying to get the sets done and move on and then hopefully get one of the one per box inserts. For me, it wasn't even about value. There was still that perception of, yeah, whatever, it's one per pack. It's not that big of a deal.
There is an exception to that. The one per pack, some of the retail configurations, retail jumbo packs or things like that, the one per pack there, all of a sudden now those are way tougher than a one per standard hobby pack insertion rate, because depending on where you lived or where you shopped, you didn't really even have access. And a lot of that stuff was thrown away or destroyed or probably still in some garages maybe, but not the retail stuff as much though. That's the thought.
Did Topps bring Topps Total back in recent years? I thought I heard that they did.
Wish.
That was a cool.
I would. Fanatics is going to have all these licenses, and I hope they don't take the easy way, because there ought to be at least one set in each sport that is a total or complete or whatever they want to call it. Basketball wouldn't have 1,200, but the other sports could have approaching 1,200 subjects. But Upper Deck had 40 man. Those are great. I think kids would like that.
Yeah, the 2 and 3 player cards are, I think, what really made Topps Total work, because those were players who, in most cases, you didn't care about, and yet the card seemed special. Something distinct about it that enlivened the set. It is a lot of cards without a subset, though. That's the one thing about Topps Total.
I'll drop a reveal here, is that when I'm looking in the dollar boxes, I give extra credit. The tipping point is if it's a multiplayer card, whether that be 3 rookies or some kind of a combo or league leaders, I give that a little more value, because I think in the future, some of those cards, when you've got several subjects, if they're young, all you need is one of them to pop. If they're older, one of them sometimes is a superstar. And like you say, they tell a story by the fact that they're 3 together. They're the 3 rookies from that team, or the 3 league leaders, or something that ties them together. If Shohei Ohtani is on a card with 2 other guys, what are they going to say? I got a 2 other guy card? No, they're going to say, I got a Shohei card. They could have a subset or an insert of Shohei with his buddies from other countries, other nationalities. Pacific did stuff like that. Some of the Latin, South American, and Caribbean countries.
Even in 1999 and 2000, they were doing that.
In fact, Pacific, they were doing some of the things you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of having subsets and insert sets that did tell a story. You were asking about Chris Martin. That doesn't quite fit. I don't know that Chris Martin was trying to tap into the inner city thing with a dog tag. That seemed like a stretch to me. And I think it was a provisional license for him being a player who was still, I think, active for another year, but was very entrepreneurial. He came to our office and we met, and he demanded an audience, because a lot of times they met with our team and me, Dr. Beckett. Okay, Chris.
Well, he's a linebacker.
No, I'm saying that I've said in one of the recent episodes, I said, when I was interviewing people, sometimes if there was somebody to come work for our team, I said, what sports did you play? And then I'd ask, what position did you play in the sport? Chris Martin was a legit linebacker.
Yeah.
Whereas most people, when you meet him, they stand a respectful distance from you, like 24 inches or something. But if they're from the East Coast, they stand like 18 inches from you. He's like a heavyweight bout weigh-in, where it's nose to nose. He was in my face saying, and he wasn't spitting or anything. He just very assured, I'm not a small guy, but he could tackle me. He was about ready to do that. He said, we're going to be in your magazine, aren't we? I said, whoa, Chris, I'm looking forward to seeing how your product does. It's not a traditional card. Oh, yeah, no, you're licensed. I said, not you're licensed, but it's not really a card license. It's a dog tag license. And I think they look interesting, and we will be tracking them and listing them in our annual price guides. And if the activity warrants, it would probably be an exception, because they're not even made out of cardboard. They're plastic. For a minute there, I thought he wasn't going to take no for an answer. But they didn't have to pull him off or anything. It was like they do at the stare down. And so, Chris, I'm in your corner. I hope it does great. And he said, well, this is important to me for after football. And I felt like saying, stay in shape. Don't give up the stage up. Because it was quirky. Dog tags. Well, 30 years later, people are wearing cards around their neck with a chain. But 30 years ago, they weren't.
But what I love about that is he took the idea of stickers, which you stick on your backpack and carry around with you. And in the 1950s, where you would take a Mickey Mantle card, stick it in the spokes of your bike, and now you have a Mickey Mantle bicycle. So the way that kids think about carrying the sport or the players around, I like the idea that he had of extending that, where you could carry it around on your neck, maybe autographed, in fact.
Well, there was an autograph provision on the back.
Yeah.
And
just like
rarely
Action
would you find him. I think that was his either aspiration because I've not seen very many of them autographed.
I've seen a few. Action Packed was also designed with a space for autographs on the back, but Chris did do some in-pack autographs of his own. And I think Emmett Smith was also.
Emmett,
No, Joe Montana. Yeah.
Emmett was local here. Emmett was over. Same thing, except Emmett stood about a foot away from me, not 3 inches away from me. And I am taller than Emmett, okay? But he is so solid. Anyway, he was a nice guy. And he really had some understanding of the hobby because his parents had a card shop over in Pensacola. So when I saw that Emmett was supportive of
Chris,
I thought that's a feather in his cap because Emmett was on top in 92-ish. Emmett, one of the best running backs at that time. Barry and Emmett were neck and neck. And so he had Emmett autograph some or promos. So that's positive, but how do you market them? And I'm thinking back on this as you bring it to my attention. He probably made a mistake of giving me a complete set. It cheapened it to me. He gave me a complete set because I never had the experience of going around looking for them or trying to figure out how are these being marketed.
Interesting. The 92 set, as I recall, was always a complete set. I have one as well. And then 93 was released in packages.
Okay.
But then he did a really good job of pivoting around, exploring stamps and magnets. I love the optimism of trying to find that thing that kids are going to like.
Truly was an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs need to not just have the ingenuity, but they have to have that drive and that perseverance, which, like I said, I got firsthand experience of that. But you have to have the will to win to be an entrepreneur. You're going to throw something out there and you've got to take the initiative, but then have the perseverance. And so trying to do more things when you're a ball player, they weren't making as much money then as they do now, but he still was making enough money to try some things. But if you hit something good and you're a player, the NFL and the NFLPA, they want the players to be successful. And so they gave him a lot of rope for trying these things that looking back, I'm just thinking you tried it, but it was too far out of the zone of ordinary. One of the reasons I pared down my collection even before I had to, the first cut is stuff that doesn't fit. Stuff that can't go in a 9-pocket sheet or an odd size or 3-dimensional, things like that. Now, maybe that doesn't matter. If it's slabbable, then it can go in a Zion case. That's maybe what they care about. They don't want a large quantity of cards. In fact, the on-card autographs on the back, that would have been not ahead of its time, but toward the beginning of that movement, cards signed ahead and not in person later.
The thing I love about cards in the 90s is all of the crazy stuff they were doing, but it's basically like sitting back and enjoying a meteor show where you're watching a bunch of things that flash for a while and then just disappear. And there's unfortunately a lot of wreckage of people with brilliant concepts and drives that weren't able to make it stick because they were trying crazy things, some that worked, some that didn't. And the stable companies who weren't as innovative were the ones who survived at the end, for the most part.
The late 90s, you've got the golden age of inserts and parallels and the PMGs. And they were not commercially successful in moving the needle, some of those cards for the sets. So they were too tough. You can't overproduce it. You can't make it too tough. It's tricky. And a lot of these going out with a blaze of fire, it's with overproduction instead of saying, we're going to make less of this every year. Of course, that's a recipe for going out of business as well.
You got to pivot.
Making more and selling less is double whammy.
You've got to be able to pivot. To me, that was the big problem with Lud Denny. There were 2 things he needed to pivot. One, he needed to rebuild brand integrity. But the other thing was he needed to transition out of the 90-91 phase into the 92-93 phase. And he didn't figure out how to make a card that was compelling enough to re-inspire people to collect his cards. Whereas other companies were able to, every 2 or 3 years, reinvent themselves and always keep inspiring collectors as they went along. Wildcard was another one that had a great idea, but they didn't have that second great idea.
Okay, let me nuance what you said about Lud, because I think it's largely true, but I would shift it. It wasn't collectors that got him in trouble. His bubble popped when these collectors were really just holding the product. And as long as they held it and it was under wraps or buried in the basement or in the back of the garage as a future valuable thing, as long as they were put away, they were sold. And same thing with the retailers. The shelves would be full, but just like recently with blasters and megas when it's coming in and going out, coming in and going out. And then all of a sudden it starts stacking up on him. And then maybe some people thought it was marked down. They were going to clear that out. But problem became that so many people were holding and they thought, I need to sell some of these now. And the wholesale price just cratered. And then he got more returns. And by that time, he had his own printing facility. So his print costs were going down with the volume going up, and he wanted to keep the presses going. His brand reputation suffered. That's what happened. He overpromised and over-delivered in the quantity, not the quality. Well, even though his living set concepts, and there's a certain Mount Rushmore of the hobby that he is on, okay, but it's not the main one. But he is an iconic builder of this industry.
Absolutely.
And maybe the Cincinnati fact set that we started out talking about wouldn't be there if Lud didn't say, I want to make this happen.
Yeah.
Count on me. I'm a team player. I love football.
I wonder if he would have had a better time if he had a baseball product that he was printing, not necessarily his, because I think he made the pro line cards. I know he made the NBA hoops cards. So if he had a spring and summer excuse for running the presses that didn't require his sales, if that could have spread things out so he didn't have to overproduce.
My guess is Topps didn't want to do stuff with him.
Well, Topps definitely, yeah.
Or baseball. It was mostly baseball in those days, really mostly baseball. It'd be unlikely they would give him a license unless they absolutely had to. If he'd have gone at his meteoric rise and kept going, he could have stroked a really big check to get in on that. And that would have been more of a cash cow than football and hockey and printing up, doing the press work for basketball. But that first storm, after a couple of years when he started getting the returns from all the retail and just overproducing,